In 1281, the most powerful man on Earth sent the largest invasion fleet in human history to crush a small island nation. Kublai Khan, heavy-set Mongol emperor in his 60s, round face showing both Mongol heritage and Chinese influence, intelligent, contemplative eyes, wearing elaborate Chinese imperial dragon robes over Mongol riding clothes, jade and gold ornaments, trimmed beard in Chinese style, expression of philosophical curiosity mixed with imperial authority. Powerful Mongol emperor in his 60s, broad weathered face with deep-set calculating eyes, thick gray-streaked beard, massive frame draped in imperial gold and silk robes embroidered with dragons, fur-lined collar, jade and gold ornaments, commanding presence radiating absolute authority. The grandson of Genghis Khan, Temujin. Weathered Mongol warlord in his 50s, broad flat face with deep-set piercing eyes, long thin mustache and beard, scarred leather skin from decades of steppe warfare, wearing wolf fur-lined armor with iron plates, distinctive Mongol helmet with horsehair plume, radiating absolute authority and cold, calculating intelligence, hands calloused from bowstring and sword, ruler of an empire that stretched from Korea to Poland. Assembled 4,000 ships and 140,000 soldiers. His Mongol armies had already conquered China, Persia, Russia, and half of Europe. No one had ever stopped them. They were unstoppable in the way that death and taxes are unstoppable. And yet, when that impossible armada reached Japan, a storm rose from the sea and destroyed nearly everything. The Japanese called it Kamikaze, the divine wind. Fast forward 600 years. 2 atomic bombs, weapons that could vaporize a city in a single flash, fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Over 200,000 people died. Japan surrendered unconditionally. Foreign soldiers occupied Japanese soil for the first time in history. It was over. Except it wasn't. Within 30 years, Japan had risen from radioactive rubble to become the second largest economy on Earth, building the cars Americans drove and the electronics they couldn't live without. How does a country survive what should destroy it, not once, not twice, but over and over again? The answer is something Japan figured out before almost anyone else. Most nations get changed by outside forces, whether they like it or not. Japan learned to change itself first, on its own terms, choosing exactly what to adopt and what to reject. This is the story of the island that mastered the art of controlled transformation, the civilization that conquered itself before the world ever could. Look at a map of East Asia. See that long chain of islands curving along the Pacific coast, separated from the mainland by a strip of open ocean? That's Japan. And that strip of water, about 120 miles at its narrowest, changed everything. Think of it like this. Japan was close enough to see what was happening on the mainland, like a neighbor watching through the window. Close enough to copy the best ideas, but far enough away that no empire could easily cross that water to conquer them. China, Korea, the great powers of Asia, they were right there, their technologies and religions and writing systems available for Japan to study and borrow. But that ocean acted like a moat around a castle. Japan could choose when to open the door. Most countries don't get to choose. The Japanese islands are also, frankly, a geological nightmare. Earthquakes constantly, tsunamis regularly, volcanoes everywhere, typhoons every year. The land is mostly mountains. Only about 15% is flat enough to farm. No oil, very little iron. By any logical calculation, this should be one of the poorest places on Earth. But that harshness taught Japan something important early on. Survival here requires more than strength. It requires discipline, cooperation, and the ability to rebuild quickly when nature destroys everything. The Japanese didn't just live with catastrophe. They built a culture around bouncing back from it. People have lived on these islands for at least 30,000 years. The earliest culture we know much about, called Jomon, meaning cord-marked after the patterns on their pottery, created some of the oldest ceramic vessels ever discovered, older than anything from ancient Mesopotamia or Egypt. For thousands of years, these people lived as hunters and fishers in a land so rich with salmon and deer and wild plants that they never needed to invent farming. They weren't primitive. They were perfectly adapted. But around 300 BCE, newcomers arrived from the Korean peninsula, bringing rice farming, metal tools, and a more competitive, hierarchical way of life. Over centuries, small kingdoms emerged, fought each other, and gradually consolidated. One clan, the Yamato, eventually came out on top and established a ruling family that, remarkably, still exists today. The Japanese imperial line is the oldest continuous hereditary monarchy in human history, stretching back at least 1,500 years and probably longer. The current emperor is directly descended from rulers who were already ancient when Charlemagne was just a barbarian king. Now here's where Japan's secret weapon was forged. Around the 6th and 7th centuries CE, the Japanese looked across the sea at China and saw something extraordinary. The Tang dynasty was the most advanced civilization in the world at that time, sophisticated, wealthy, cultured, powerful. China was the Rome, the Paris, the New York of its era. Everything cool came from China. A lesser nation might have been overwhelmed by this giant neighbor, absorbed culturally even if not conquered militarily. But Japan did something clever. They sent wave after wave of ambassadors, scholars, and monks to China. They studied everything: the writing system, the Buddhist religion, the Confucian philosophy, the government bureaucracy, the architecture, the calendar, the legal codes. And then they took all of it home and changed it. Think of it like this: Japan didn't just copy China. Japan ate China's culture, digested it, and rebuilt it into something new. Chinese characters were adapted into Japanese syllabaries that could actually represent Japanese sounds. Chinese Buddhism merged with Japan's indigenous nature religion, Shinto, creating something unique. Chinese governmental structures were adopted, then slowly transformed to fit Japanese conditions. The result was a civilization that looked Chinese on the surface, but was fundamentally Japanese underneath. This would become the pattern that repeated throughout Japanese history. Encounter a powerful foreign influence, study it carefully, adopt what works, reject what doesn't. Transform the rest until it becomes Japanese. No one else did this as systematically or as successfully. The first great test of Japan's survival came in the 13th century, when the Mongol Empire, the largest contiguous land empire in human history, decided to conquer Japan. You need to understand how terrifying the Mongols were. They had already destroyed every major power in their path. Cities that resisted were literally erased, their populations slaughtered down to the last child. In Baghdad, the Mongols killed so many people that the Tigris River ran black with ink from all the books they threw into it. When Kublai Khan, heavy-set Mongol emperor in his 60s, round face showing both Mongol heritage and Chinese influence, intelligent contemplative eyes, wearing elaborate Chinese imperial dragon robes over Mongol riding clothes, jade and gold ornaments, trimmed beard in Chinese style, expression of philosophical curiosity mixed with imperial authority. powerful Mongol emperor in his 60s, broad, weathered face with deep-set calculating eyes, thick, gray-streaked beard, massive frame draped in imperial gold and silk robes embroidered with dragons, fur-lined collar, jade and gold ornaments, commanding presence radiating absolute authority, sent envoys to Japan demanding submission. The Japanese regent, a young man named Hojo Tokimune, who was said to have ice water in his veins, received them politely. And then he had them beheaded on the beach. War was now certain. The first invasion in 1274 was a disaster for the Japanese. About 40,000 Mongol, Chinese, and Korean troops landed on the island of Kyushu. The Japanese samurai, archetypal warrior, weathered face, traditional yoroi armor with clan insignia, katana and wakizashi at waist, fierce loyalty in eyes, rode out to fight the way they always had. One warrior announcing his name and lineage, challenging an enemy to single combat, fighting with honor. The Mongols didn't care about honor. They fought in tight formations. They used explosive bombs hurled from catapults, weapons the Japanese had never seen. They communicated with drums and flags, moving as a single unit, while the samurai charged individually. It was a slaughter. But then something strange happened. That very night, a storm blew in and damaged the Mongol fleet. The invasion force retreated. Japan got lucky. But the Japanese weren't stupid. They didn't sit around hoping for another miracle. For the next 7 years, they prepared obsessively. They built a massive stone wall along the Kyushu coastline, miles of fortification. They practiced new tactics, learned from Mongol methods, reorganized their forces. When Kublai Khan, heavy-set Mongol emperor in his 60s, round face showing both Mongol heritage and Chinese influence, intelligent, contemplative eyes, wearing elaborate Chinese imperial dragon robes over Mongol riding clothes, jade and gold ornaments, trimmed beard in Chinese style, expression of philosophical curiosity mixed with imperial authority. Powerful Mongol emperor in his 60s, broad, weathered face with deep-set calculating eyes, thick, gray-streaked beard, massive frame draped in imperial gold and silk robes embroidered with dragons, fur-lined collar, jade and gold ornaments, commanding presence radiating absolute authority, returned in 1281 with that record-breaking fleet of 140,000 men. The Japanese were ready. For 7 weeks, they held the invaders on the beaches, refusing to let them establish a foothold. Japanese warriors launched night raids against the anchored ships. They used the stone wall as cover, negating Mongol advantages. And then the typhoon came. The storm that struck in August 1281 killed perhaps 100,000 Mongol soldiers in a single night. Ships smashed against each other, capsized in massive waves, drove onto rocks. Warriors who had conquered half the known world drowned in their armor. The invasion was over. The Mongol Empire, which no one had ever stopped, had been stopped by Japan. Or, as the Japanese believed, by the gods themselves. The divine wind had protected the sacred islands. This story became foundational to Japanese identity, a proof that Japan was special, protected, unconquerable. The word kamikaze would echo through history in ways no one could have predicted. The centuries that followed were not peaceful. Japan tore itself apart in a way that would have destroyed most countries. The central government weakened until it became almost meaningless. Regional warlords called daimyo accumulated power and fought each other constantly. By the late 1400s, Japan had shattered into hundreds of tiny kingdoms, each ruled by someone who owed loyalty to no one. This era, called the Sengoku period, or the Age of Warring States, was one of the most violent in Japanese history. Villages burned, Peasants were conscripted as soldiers and died by the thousands. Betrayal was so common, it became almost expected. It seemed like Japan would never be unified again. 3 extraordinary men accomplished it. The first was Oda Nobunaga, military genius in his 40s, sharp, predatory features, thin mustache, eyes burning with ruthless intelligence, elaborate armor with European-influenced elements, commanding and terrifying presence. A military genius who was also, by most accounts, a psychopath. He was willing to do things other warlords considered unthinkable. When a Buddhist monastery opposed him, he surrounded it with his army and set it on fire, killing every man, woman, and child inside. Perhaps 20,000 people. He introduced firearms on a massive scale, bought from Portuguese traders, and revolutionized Japanese warfare. He came closer to unifying Japan than anyone in 2 centuries before his own general betrayed him in 1582 and Nobunaga died, possibly by his own hand, in a burning temple. The second was Toyotomi Hideyoshi, risen peasant general, small wiry frame, simian features that earned him monkey face nickname, cunning eyes, flamboyant golden armor, radiating ambition, who had started life as a peasant so lowly that his childhood nickname was Monkey Face. Through pure cunning and military brilliance, he rose to become Nobunaga's top general, and after Nobunaga's death, he completed the unification. Hideyoshi dreamed of conquering China itself and invaded Korea twice as a stepping stone. He failed, but he succeeded in ending the civil wars and making Japan whole again. The third was Tokugawa Ieyasu, patient strategist in his 50s, heavy-set, calm watchful eyes, neat beard, simple but quality armor, embodiment of calculated patience, the patient one. He watched while Nobunaga and Hideyoshi did the hard work, biding his time, making alliances, waiting for his moment. When Hideyoshi died, Ieyasu outmaneuvered his rivals, won the decisive Battle of Sekigahara in 1600, and established a military government that would rule Japan for over 250 years. The Tokugawa Shogunate had begun. And then Japan did something almost no other country has ever done. It closed itself off from the world entirely. Starting in the 1630s, Japan systematically cut off almost all contact with the outside world. Christianity, which had been spreading rapidly, brought by Portuguese and Spanish missionaries, was banned. Converts were given a choice: renounce their faith or die. Tens of thousands chose death. The methods of execution were horrifying: crucifixion, burning, being hung upside down over pits until blood pooled in the skull. Foreign trade was reduced to a single artificial island in Nagasaki Harbor, where a handful of Dutch merchants were permitted to do business under humiliating restrictions. Japanese people were forbidden to leave the country. Ships were redesigned to be incapable of ocean voyages. Why? The Tokugawa had looked at what European colonization was doing to Asia and decided they wanted no part of it. The Philippines had been conquered. Indonesia was being exploited. India was being penetrated. Christianity, in the Tokugawa view, created divided loyalties that foreign powers could exploit to destabilize Japan. So they chose to sacrifice connection to the outside world for the sake of stability and independence. And for over 200 years, it worked. The Tokugawa peace was remarkable. No major wars, thriving cities, rising literacy, sophisticated arts and culture. Edo, the shogun's capital, modern Tokyo, became one of the largest cities in the world. Theater, poetry, woodblock prints, elaborate gardens, the cultural achievements were extraordinary. But while Japan stood still, the world was changing. Europe industrialized. Steam power, railroads, modern weapons, technologies that Japan had never seen were transforming the balance of global power. And in 1853, that new world came crashing through Japan's closed door. Commodore Matthew Perry of the United States Navy steamed into Edo Bay with 4 warships. The Japanese called them the Black Ships, massive, smoke-belching, terrifying. Their guns could have leveled the capital. Perry carried a letter from the American president demanding that Japan open itself to trade. The message was simple: open your ports or we will force them open. The Tokugawa government had no choice. They signed treaties opening Japan to foreign trade. Other Western powers quickly demanded the same terms. The humiliation was complete. The shogunate, which had kept Japan stable for 2.5 centuries, was now exposed as helpless against Western technology. Within 15 years, the entire system collapsed. Young samurai from domains that had always resented Tokugawa rule seized power in what they called the Meiji Restoration, ruling in the name of the young Emperor Meiji. Young emperor in his teens, delicate, refined features, traditional imperial robes, transitioning to Western military uniform. Symbol of transformation. What followed was one of the most dramatic national transformations in human history. In a single generation, Japan completely reinvented itself. The samurai class was abolished. A modern conscript army was built on the Prussian model. Railroads and telegraph lines spread across the islands. Universal education was established. A constitution was written, modeled on Germany's. Industries were built from scratch: textiles, steel, shipbuilding. Young Japanese were sent to Europe and America to study everything from engineering to military tactics, and they came back to rebuild their country. The speed was astonishing. In 1868, Japan was a feudal society with swords and topknots. By 1895, Japan had defeated China in a modern war and seized Taiwan. By 1905, Japan had annihilated the Russian Baltic Fleet at the Battle of Tsushima, the first time in modern history that an Asian nation had defeated a European great power in a major war. The world was shocked. Japan had arrived. But the same ability to transform, the same fierce national pride, could be turned toward terrible ends. Japanese leaders studied Western imperialism and decided that empire was the path to respect and power. They watched European nations carve up China and concluded that Japan must play the same game or become a victim. The result was a descent into militarism that culminated in some of the worst atrocities of the 20th century. The invasion of China, the rape of Nanking where hundreds of thousands of civilians were massacred, the attack on Pearl Harbor, and finally, the atomic fire. When the bombs fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945, something unprecedented happened. Cities were vaporized. Tens of thousands died instantly. Thousands more from radiation in the weeks that followed. The emperor went on the radio, the first time ordinary Japanese had ever heard his voice, and told his people to endure the unendurable. Japan surrendered. For the first time ever, foreign soldiers occupied the sacred islands. Any other nation might have shattered completely. The trauma was total. Military defeat, nuclear annihilation, the shame of occupation, the collapse of everything they had believed about their divine destiny. Cities were rubble. The economy was destroyed. Millions were dead. But Japan had been doing this for thousands of years. Catastrophe comes. Japan transforms. Japan survives. Within 3 decades, the ruins had become an economic miracle. Japan rebuilt itself around manufacturing and trade instead of military conquest. Made in Japan went from meaning cheap junk to meaning the highest quality in the world. By the 1980s, Japanese companies dominated industries that Americans had invented: cars, electronics, consumer goods. Japan had risen from the ashes again. This is the pattern that runs through all of Japanese history. A challenge arrives: Chinese civilization, Mongol invasion, Western technology, atomic destruction. Japan transforms itself to meet that challenge, taking what it needs, adapting everything, remaining somehow Japanese through it all. The island that watched and waited and chose its transformations. The civilization that conquered itself before the world ever could. Today, Japan faces new challenges: an aging population, economic stagnation, an uncertain position between China and America. But if history teaches anything, it is that Japan will adapt. It always has. From the Jomon potters to the samurai to the tech giants of Tokyo, one thing has never changed. This small island nation has outlasted every empire that tried to dominate it, absorbed every culture that tried to overwhelm it, and rebuilt from every catastrophe that should have ended it. They say the nail that sticks up gets hammered down, but Japan is the nail that refused to be hammered, because it learned to reshape itself before the hammer ever fell. That is the secret of Japan. That is why it endures. And whatever the future brings, Japan will do what it has always done: watch, choose, transform, and remain.